Welcome in to another edition of AWA Unleashed. We are the preeminent AWA podcast / video stream. I am Chris Tubbs. I'm one part of it. I'm not even going to wait to bring these guys in because I haven't seen these guys in a while. It feels like forever. Let's bring in Mick Curt and George Shire. And guys, we've got a show today that I think a lot of people are going to be excited to hear about. I think a lot of people want to know about our topic today because he's one of the most beloved individuals. And, well, I'll save the rest of it. But we're going to talk about Curt Hennig, the late Curt Hennig. And I hate to say late when you talk about Curt Hennig because I didn't know him like you guys did, but I loved everything about him that I saw on television and what I heard. But before we get going, we've had a very busy couple of weeks behind the scenes. Let's fill you guys in. First of all, I do want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors here. We got two people that are coming aboard. Number one, Soda Stick, your best place for Minnesota sports merchandise. Mick's got the Met Center cap on. I've got the Hormel Row of Fame, the Wiener winner. Yes, George.
Oh, I'm looking up here above.
Oh, yeah, right up there.
Yeah. Up there.
Yeah, the upper right-hand corner. Great Minnesota-themed sports merchandise. In fact, it's the best place to go. If you love your novelty shirts, if you're a sports fan, hit them up at Soda Stick. We'll actually put the information down there. Hold on. There it is right there. We're going to scroll it. And as a matter of fact, if you want to get something there and you use the promo code Unleashed, you're going to get 15% off. So use the promo code Unleashed. I used it over the weekend, guys. It works like a charm. Beautiful. And I did do it. So want to thank Soda Stick. Also want to thank our friends at Lift Bridge Brewing right there. As a matter of fact, I'm drinking the Juicy IPA because it's tastes good. I'm a big fan of the margaritas, but the IPA goes down pretty good. So there you go.
Now we're drinking on the job.
It's our show. We can do what we want.
There you go.
You know, we can do that. So want to thank as well Lift Bridge Brewery because they are the official beer of AWA Unleashed. Let's face it, best beer, best brewery for the best fans. And check out their inventory for the booze and the swag at Lift Bridge Brewery right there.com. Speaking of all of that combined, guys, I'm super excited to tell you that for the first time, I mean, my gosh, we've been doing it for like 4 months or so. We are going to have our very first live show. I'm so incredibly excited. We are partnering with the awesome people at Lift Bridge Brewery and also Midwest All-Star Wrestling, which I know, Mick, you've got a very good working relationship with them. We are going to be doing a live event on Saturday, June 11th, before the Midwest All-Star Wrestling card. It's going to be at Lift Bridge Brewery, doors at noon, live podcast at 2. I think we were going to do it at 1:30, push it back to 2 o'clock. The wrestling at 3:30, and you can see the link right there. Get the tickets, but just a lot of great stuff going on. I think here's a chance, guys, for us to really continue to pay it back to the people that have supported us, and here's a chance, really, I think, to say thank you in person to a lot of the people that have really been there for us. What do you say, George?
I absolutely. We've got good sponsors, and they've been great enough to come on board and look after us, so to speak. And, I'm telling the fans like you are, get out there and use the code, get your merchandise. And then when we get to that June 11th, I'm excited about this. This is going to be fun. In person, we're going to get a chance to be in front of the folks, answer their questions, and have a chance to chat with them about our favorite subject, AWA wrestling.
Very much looking forward to this, of course. My question for you, Mr. Tubbs, would be, are George and I going to be kind of fending for ourselves? Because I know the security detail is going to be surrounding you.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too.
You can't just leave us hanging out in the wind there, buddy. You got to, get us somebody.
Oh, see, no, I'm gonna be drinking their IPA. So I mean, you guys are on your own. That's
Look
what
at
we're gonna do. I know. See, you give me a little bit of that, and I'm like, whoo, you guys fend for yourselves.
Man.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
It is. It sure is. I love the live stuff when SNR would go on location, especially with that guy there, the Authority.
Yeah.
He would make his heel appearances. It went over great. It's so terrific to interact with everybody, and very much looking forward to it. So thanks everybody involved. Thank you, Liftbridge and MAW, and we're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be great, and I'm so excited because this is an opportunity that I realize not a lot of people get. And again, Soda Stick, man, you guys have been awesome in supporting us. And by the way, I know people have been asking about AWA Unleashed t-shirts and stuff. If that's something that you guys are really interested in, if you guys really want it, hit us up in the YouTube comments, hit us up on Facebook, the comments underneath, Twitter, my Twitter, you can see it right there at CM Tubbs at AWA Unleashed. I mean, send Mick or George a message, send me a message. Let me know, because if that's something that you guys are interested in, maybe we can make that happen. And I mean, it's all about what you guys want, right? I mean, this is ultimately, I'm a fan, you guys are fans, and really, guys, the show's just about something we all love. And you mentioned it perfectly, George and Mick. I mean, this is about the AWA. We all love it. We have that common thread. So if you guys want AWA swag, I mean, let us know. Let us know.
Even if you don't want it, we're gonna try to get it out there. We're gonna do a full court press Vince McMahon, whether you like it or not. This is what we're shoving down your, so
we're gonna shove it down your throat.
We'll get the stuff out there.
Now who's doing the heel roll?
Yeah.
All right. That card they're gonna have there on June 11th. Maybe the Authority should go and make his presence with some of those goofballs they got wrestling.
Oh, dear God.
I believe they call them whippersnappers now, George.
Yeah, whippersnappers.
All right.
Hey, well, let's get to our show.
Let's go. Yeah,
we do. Okay. Let's finish. Let's start by telling you the winner to the trivia last week, Nick, because it's been a while. Let's get the trivia winner for last week, and then let's go ahead and get into Curt Hennig.
Trivia winner for last week. Congratulations to loyal listener/viewer Brett Williams. He knew that of the wrestlers that I mentioned, former AWA wrestlers, only one had not refereed in the AWA, and that was our good buddy, the late Stan Crusher Kowalski. And he didn't referee as Stan Kowalski or Bert Smith or Karl Kovacs or anybody else. So congratulations, Brett Williams.
And we're gonna have one more trivia coming up a little bit later on. All right, guys. Now that we've got all of the business out of the way, let's get to the topic here, and that is somebody that I know maybe one of our most requested topics so far. I think, would you say that Curt Hennig is somebody that people they want to hear about? They want to know, who is Curt Hennig? What was he like? And really, we're going to get into the early days of Curt, and really more of the family aspect too, because when I think, guys, I think of, wrestling royal families, and you've got two in Minnesota that come to mind, the Gagnes. But I tell you what, for the lineage and the legacy that the Hennigs have left in this state and in this region, I would make the case that the Hennigs are the number one royal family in Minnesota wrestling. I mean, what would you say to that, Mick?
I would say they are certainly right up there, and I would also caution all three of us to talk about the lineage, because that's going to be part of the trivia question. But no question about it.
The IPA kicking in.
There you go. The Gagnes are certainly, maybe they are the first family of Minnesota wrestling, but if not, the Hennigs are, if not right up there, they're a close second. And Curt himself left a body of work that I think is really unmatched for the era. And I know how proud Larry was of him, but we'll be talking about all of that.
What say you about that, George? I mean, your impressions of Curt Hennig.
Well, I tell you what about Curt Hennig. The reason he has such an appeal is he was able to carry over from what we had, the old school as we call it, and then he moved into the expansion era and became a star in the WWF, which it was still at that time. And I think that's where the appeal comes in. He was able to carry over and be part of both eras. And we'll get talking about it. I mean, Curt was just a special talent.
There you go. Sorry, just had to unmute my microphone. I'm getting some of the stuff ready. So when did you guys hear about this young kid named Curt? I mean, Larry was well established in the business, but when did you start hearing about his son and maybe his son potentially having a future in the industry? Go ahead and start with that, Mick.
I heard about that early on. It was no secret. And before I got into the announcing aspect of the business, I would go to the shows and, people would point out, sitting up in the seats watching the action, was this young Hennig that had designs on becoming a professional wrestler. And, Curt was there. He was doing the scouting. He was a big fan. Of course, his dad was a legend. So early on, I don't know how old Curt would have been at the time, maybe fresh out of high school or whatever, but the seeds were being planted way back then. It's a long time ago.
I'd go back even a little bit farther than that. Here in one of our previous shows, we talked about the Larry Hennig babyface turn from the hated heel that he was when he came into the ring in 1974 and saved Greg Gagne from the triple teaming of Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Bobby Heenan. And during that match, or after that match, Larry carried the prone, broken body of Greg out of camera range. And then on his interview, he said, I couldn't stand by and watch these three guys try to end the career of Greg, because I have a son of my own, a boy of my own that, has aspirations to be a wrestler. And that was in 74. Long before Curt was probably ready to start thinking about it. But that was the first seed that, and that bona fide Larry as a babyface at that point, because they played that morality card. You're not going to watch somebody beat up a kid and wreck his career. And Larry wouldn't want it done to his own boy.
And that's a tale that's old as time. And there's truth to it, right? I mean, you can look at a wrestling story and you can say that's totally crazy, but at that point, there's some believability to it. And when you guys first met Curt, did you meet him? Was he in high school? Was he out of high school? Was he just starting training? When did you guys first meet him, and what were your first thoughts of him? Why don't you go ahead and start with that, Mick?
To be perfectly honest, I mean, I met Curt. I was introduced to him in that same era that I was talking about earlier on. And, Curt wants to be a wrestler. And at the time, you're thinking, okay, well, good for you. And you knew that the odds were very good because of who his father was and the association with Vern and Larry and whatnot. Curt was pleasant. He was a pretty quiet guy back at the time, far removed from the eventual river that Curt Hennig became, but very pleasant guy, but kind of nondescript. And I think that actually translated into his first couple of years in the business too. That personality of his took a little while to develop, and then ultimately it was perfect, as they say.
What do you remember, like the first couple times that you met him, George?
Well, Curt actually got into the business in the early 80s, and he came in as a rookie. He'd trained with Vern, and obviously his dad had such an influence on him. And I think that was the best of both worlds for Curt coming into the business and having, Larry's style of wrestling, and then Vern's, teaching him the basics, and then the opponents. And that was in like 80, 81. And then Curt went on the road for a while, was gone from the AWA. And there's a good picture of Larry and Curt, just a proud dad and his son, and Curt is just a kid there. But when I actually got a chance to meet Curt wasn't until 1984, and Mick will remember this. I actually met him for the first time at our supervention at the Prom Ballroom in St. Paul, the convention that Mick and I put together. And Curt was one of the wrestlers of the many that we had there that night that was nice enough to come and make everything go so well. And that was the night I had a chance to talk with him for the first time. But he was very, very mild, very kind, very quiet, so to speak, still obviously playing a baby face. And he had come back here at that point after being gone for a little bit. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
So you guys, I think one of the first things that you guys mentioned to me is the Gagne Hennig feud. Let's go ahead and just get into that. Mick, how would you describe that feud being renewed? Because apparently it was one that was dormant. Vern and Larry feuded for a while, and then apparently, that cooled off. And I mean, how did that get reignited?
Well, I think the history of it, probably will leave to George in terms of how it came about. It was a natural. I mean, it was, Vern and Larry, dormant or not all those years. It was the progression, it was the old story, whether it's the Ortons or the Von Erichs or the Gagnes and the Hennigs. Ultimately, the fathers at some point had a feud with each other, and it carried on into the kids. And when you have a real life backdrop of some animosity, which you did with with Larry and Vern, that also played into it. So it was a very, very easy thing to get into. And I think looking back on it, if this makes any sense, Vern and Greg probably took it more seriously than Curt and Larry. Curt and Larry seemed to be having some fun with it. Curt would go out on TV and, talk about how his dad pulled Vern Gagne out of his penny loafers. And, Greg would talk about how when Vern found out he was going to have a son, he anticipated having this big 6'5", 300-pound football player. And what Curt said is, and then all of a sudden, can you imagine that when Curt is 16, 17 years old, Vern's looking at this, or Greg is 16, 17. Vern's looking at him like, where did I get this kid with a stack of dimes for a neck? So it was kind of a natural, but I think Curt and Larry had a good time with it. You could tell.
Yeah, go ahead and follow up on that, George, because I know that this was kind of this was something that you remember fondly too.
Well, and you talk about the natural progression. Everybody knows the history between Larry and Vern. Vern brought Larry into the business, and Vern obviously was the scientific, good guy, baby face. Larry was different in the sense that he was bigger. He was more the bully type wrestler. And of course, as he got into the early 60s, that's where he was going with his career. He was better as a big bully or a heel. And then Vern would take, get excited about that Porky, and he called him Fat Boy and everything, and saying that he's taking a shortcut. And Larry would have the animosity that Vern is jealous because now I'm better than the teacher. And it was perfect. Teacher, pupil. I mean, like Mick said, the Ortons, the Von Erichs, you name it, They use that angle. And then, of course, as the 60s went on, there was no feud that was more prominent in the AWA than the ongoing rivalry between Larry and Vern. And any match they had, any tag match they had, it was believable. And then, Vern broke Larry's leg, and that added more fuel to the fire. Larry was going to end his career and put the champion in the rocking chair for good, And then when we get to that 74 point, when Larry came back from the East Coast as the Axe, and he was still a heel, and he was feuding with the son of Flicka, as he called him, Greg Gagne. He called him the son of Flicka. And he said, now there's two Gagnes. And he says, then one time he says, well, I actually only 1.5, because he picked on Greg's size, And I mean, they just added this. Then that day when Bockwinkel, Heenan, and Stevens are triple teaming Greg after Jim Brunzell had been eliminated in the ring. And they're triple teaming Greg, and Larry comes charging in. And everybody thought, Roger Kent included, they're telling the fans that, oh my God, now here comes Larry Hennig to add more insult to the injury. Because Larry and Greg had some serious matches when Larry came back. And Larry, on the other hand, turned against his three buddies and carried Greg off. And that's where that immediate hero. But like you say, it was that morality play. And then Larry played the babyface. We even saw Larry and Vern tag team a couple of times between that time period before Curt got into it. So, but it was going to come back because Curt, he had that chip on his shoulder where he wanted to prove he was the best Hennig.
So you were mentioning the beat down by Stevens and Bockwinkel and what about Curt's 1 hour Broadway with Nick Bockwinkel? Because that seems like it'd just be a classic.
That to me, and it's funny, people who are not all that familiar with the AWA will go on YouTube or whatever, and they will see this 1 hour draw from the Showboat in Vegas. It had absolutely everything going for it. And I mean, they went to 60 minutes. It wasn't, the Al DeRusha, 42-minute, 60-minute match. But phenomenal. Nick, I believe, was 52 years old at the time, so he was probably 20 years Curt's senior, and they tore the place up. And I know a lot of wrestlers will say to young guys coming in, if you want a clinic, if you want to see how this is done, you watch that match on YouTube. Just phenomenal. And that may have been Curt's real coming of age, I think, as a wrestler.
Well, and I think, too, in that match, as Mick pointed out, the age difference. I mean, Curt was 20 years younger than Vern at that point, or than Nick. And back and forth, what that match brought, I mean, I've watched it a few times, and you had everything. You had the moves, the bumps, the just how great they worked together. And it not only showcased Curt, it showcased Nick, because obviously here's a guy who's, double Curt's age. And yes, that is where Curt became Curt Hennig. And really, it's on YouTube, guys. Go out and take a look at it. And it was a legit hour. That also led to the San Francisco debacle between the two of them when Larry Zbyszko got involved and Nick lost the title. And there's a story behind that, too. And, we'll probably talk on that.
It's interesting, Chris, when Curt was teaming with Scott Hall, popular tag team, AWA tag team champions, and Curt was, I guess, starting to come into his own, but he had Scott Hall, as a go-to. But I think the singles match with Nick, and there's Curt and Scott, hard to believe they're both gone now. Wow. The singles match between Curt and Nick, that 1 hour Broadway, I think established what Curt could do as a singles wrestler, similarly to what happened with Jim Brunzell when he went to those 1 hour Broadways with Nick. This too, they were learning from the best, and they were learning from the master, and it established what they could do as singles wrestlers.
George, I know that we talk a lot about Larry and obviously so, but I know there were a lot of talks that Curt had with his dad, and I think that's something that I'm curious about. Just what was the relationship between the two of them?
With Larry, I'm going to tell you, you probably could not find two father-sons that were closer. I had the opportunity to visit Larry Hennig after Curt's passing. And, after it happened, Larry was, absolutely devastated. He actually became sort of a recluse for a few years. He just couldn't even talk about it or be out in public about it. Later on, when when Larry would talk about Curt, you never saw a guy light up more than Larry did when he would mention Curt in the ring or watching Curt. And one of the real moments, and Larry told me this personally, he said that of all of the accomplishments that he personally had in the business, Larry now, he'd been AWA tag team champion and a number of times, and he had Japanese tag team title and all the main events and all the accolades he had. Mm-hmm. He said his proudest moment was when he had a chance to go with Curt to the Pacific Northwest territory, and they were actually able together as a father-son team win the Pacific Northwest tag team title from Rip Oliver and Matt Bourne. Now,
yeah,
Matt
and they are right there.
Yeah, there you go. And that picture, Larry gave that picture to me. And, he said that this was his proudest moment when he was standing next to Curt in the ring and able to work those matches. He said, I just was so proud. And I get it. When I was at his house, Larry's house, we sat at his table and he was almost in tears when he would talk about how good Curt was. He loved when they'd go fishing when they were younger, and the trips they took, they'd go hunting. And he goes to a wall in his room. He says, come down here. He says, we go to this big hallway, and he's got all these pictures, posters, accolades of Curt on the wall. And to talk about how close they were, mm-hmm. I understand why he was devastated when Curt was gone. But he had the same accolades when he would talk then about Joe, Curt's son, and Amy, his daughter. Mm-hmm. Just a proud grandpa. I mean, Larry, he was a father. He was a father who halted his career almost because he didn't want to travel to stay home with his family. And you got to bless the man for that.
Yeah.
I would have Larry on SNR a couple of times. We would sit ahead of time. Okay, what are we going to talk about now? Let's talk about such and such, and we'll talk about your career and the feud with Vern. And Larry would almost always say no. We can mention it briefly, but I want to talk about Curt.
Yep.
It was such, like George said, such a loving relationship on so many levels, not only the father-son relationship, but what Curt was accomplishing day by day, month by month, year by year as a professional wrestler. Like George said, Larry was absolutely popping his buttons. That's all he wanted to talk about. So they had a wonderful relationship.
And the thing is too, when you look at Curt, he was in between what Vern and Larry were as far as a wrestler. I mean, Curt wasn't the biggest wrestler in the world, but he wasn't smaller like Greg Gagne. And he was smaller than his dad, but he had more of a build. He had more of the speed. I think Larry saw in him some of the accolades that Larry wished he'd have had, maybe being a little bit faster, a little bit, smaller, because mm-hmm. Larry was always just big and he had to work that way. Curt was phenomenal. I mean, we could talk for hours on how great that kid was. And look at how young he is there. I mean, this was when he first started out. And you'd see him come off that top rope, the ring rope, and deliver that drop kick. What a class act. Just phenomenal worker.
What kind of conversations did you have at the Showboat with Curt about his future, Mick? Do you have a chance to talk to him kind of a lot about maybe what some of his post-AWA aspirations were?
Well, when we could get Curt away from the blackjack tables or, the slot machines or the pull tabs or whatever at the Showboat, it was interesting because, again, this is when I'm there with Curt, he has just recently transitioned from the baby face, kind of milquetoast baby face, to this incredible cocky heel. And he had done so well. He's feuding with Greg. He's feuding with Wahoo. He's on top of the world, and he's got the AWA title. And one night he just confided in me. He says, I got to tell you, prepare yourself because this might not last too long. And what are you talking about? Well, I'm getting some phone calls. I'm getting some signals. I'm getting some offers. And this may be the kind of thing where, you just never know. Eventually, I might have to make a jump here. And remember, you're talking to the guy that is the AWA heavyweight champion at the time. So he's on top of the promotion. The AWA is still kicking. still got life left in him, but already you're getting the signals that he might go someplace else. And, he wanted it kayfabed, obviously. So, nobody said anything about it. But again, back as early as, the AWA 1987, August or September of 87, Curt was already looking beyond the AWA.
I'd point out something too. I alluded a moment ago to the San Francisco match between Nick and Curt Hennig when Nick was still AWA champ. And for those fans that have seen that on YouTube, Larry Zbyszko came into the ring before the match started and basically put a challenge out to Stanley Blackburn in the ring. Stanley Blackburn was there. And Zbyszko said, I want to challenge the winner of this match. And Blackburn said, you've got a match. Now, when you watch that match, the match between Nick and Curt again was so phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But during the course of the match, it was obvious that Curt was playing the heel and against Nick of all people. And then Larry Zbyszko got into the act where he allegedly handed a roll of coins to Curt, who just knocked Nick out. And if you watch Nick, he just falls over like a skyscraper falling. He's out cold. And then, of course, there's the controversy. Ray Stevens got in the ring. Blackburn was in the ring. Zbyszko got in the ring. Nick was very quiet about it. He says, I don't know what happened. My lights went out. But they were throwing the controversy out that Curt actually won the title because he pinned Nick and was holding the belt. Gary DeRusha, the referee, had awarded him the match. Well, then what the fans didn't know behind the scenes was Curt had contemplated going to the WWF. And he actually had told Vern he was going to go. So that ending to the match was set up so that if Curt was leaving, Nick would have gotten the title back. But if he was staying, which he ended up doing, Vern and Curt worked it out, and Curt ended up staying that time. And then the title legitimately went to Curt Hennig after Stanley Blackburn reviewed the films. But that's what happened behind the scenes. Curt had already been talking and had actually said he was going to leave.
Blackburn ever actually reviewed? Stanley probably reviewed some films at a deserted movie theater someplace. I don't know. And you always knew if Stanley Black.
Did you have to put a nickel in to view the film?
It was a quarter when never mind.
Yeah. Sorry, inflation.
Well, you were with him at the Faust, huh?
Don't worry. The Faust. Oh, my God. But, what was interesting about that Curt Nick match in San Francisco, again, if you watch the tape, they're making Curt be the heel, but yet when he pinned Nick, the crowd popped. They gave Curt a babyface pop. So either, the fans weren't paying attention or the plans were kind of going awry a little bit. But I thought, well, wait a minute. Larry Zbyszko, arguably the number one heel, just handed Curt a roll of quarters. He cold cocked Nick, and the fans are cheering. So Curt had this broad-based appeal. Even then, he was.
Why do you think it was? Why do you think he had that appeal where being the heel and that whole story, but yet people were behind him?
Because, well, first of all, like George has always said, wrestling was changing, and the regular babyface, humdrum babyface, all-American apple pie wasn't getting over as much as they used to. Plus the fact that Curt was a cool guy. He had this edge to him. He had this cockiness to him, and people were identifying with it. It was starting to be that heel crowd coming into the era of professional wrestling. So people were kind of latching on to Curt. They liked the conceit. They liked the arrogance, and it was, I guess, changing of the guard.
Well, and I think too with the changing of the guard, and you look at. Again, going back to that age demographics for Curt and Nick, I think at that point in time, the fans were kind of with Nick, but they weren't, because Nick at that point was now becoming the aging champion, the veteran who had the title for too long. And Curt was the up and coming, and he had that pizzazz, it just, and again, we were getting clouded in good guy, bad guy type thing, but definitely I want to make it clear that Stanley Blackburn could look at tapes of this one because he was not only there, they replayed it because he was at ringside. And all those quarters in the ring, I mean, it's obvious that, Curt didn't bring those in to play the slot machine in the middle of the ring.
Wow.
Wow. No in the trunks. You mentioned the Pacific Northwest territory. Kind of take me through that, George, and how much that meant to Larry and Curt for the two of them to team up in, as we saw earlier, were tag team champs.
Well, this was a training ground for Curt because he had left here after 1981 and he was still just a young kid, a rookie. And he goes to the Pacific Northwest, which was a thriving territory all through the decades with promoter Don Owen. They had stars like Rip Oliver and Matt Bourne, who I said was a second generation wrestler, son of Tony Bourne. And then we had Buddy Rose was huge there. And that brings up a good point. One of the guys that, this may surprise you, one of the guys that both Larry and Curt told me that they had accolades for was Buddy Rose because they had met him in the Pacific Northwest. And of course, Larry knew him from his early AWA days. But Curt actually teamed with Buddy Rose for a while, and they were Pacific Northwest champions. And then Curt also had a tag team run with a guy named Scott McGee, who fans didn't know at the time was the son of wrestler Jeff Ports.
Yep.
So you had a lot of rookies there, but Curt was able to pick up a lot of talent. And he actually said that he enjoyed working with Buddy Rose when he was in the Pacific Northwest. Ironically, when they came back, or when Curt came back home, by the time he got to the tag team title with Scott Hall, it was Buddy Rose and Doug Summers that they lost the tag team title to, the AWA title. So it was a trading ground for him. But when Larry was in the Pacific Northwest, Larry said that was, as I said earlier, that was his highlight. He said, I just loved being in the ring with my son. And that's the way he said it. So, I mean, I think at the end of Larry's career, because he was past his prime at that point, this was a happy moment. And I don't know if we're going to touch on, this was kind of a picture taken around the Road Warriors time when Larry and Curt were wrestling against the Road Warriors here in the AWA. But I think another time we want to talk about Curt, and I'll let Mick have some time here. But hello, Mick, you came.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're gonna break this up into two parts because I mean, there's so much going on.
We want to talk. We want to mention about a Hennig race feud that involved Curt too.
Yeah, we'll definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've still got a lot of questions, and I mean, there's no way that we would get this underneath the hour time limit that I like to keep it at for various reasons. So we're going to break this up into two different parts. We know, Mick, that he was a chronic ribber. Like, he'd like to have fun. Tell me about the Mitch Snow duffel bag incident.
Poor Mitch Snow. The late jamming Mitch Snow. AWA babyface when I was working out at the Showboat in Vegas. And Curt's reputation as a ribber, I mean, in the business, it's as far and wide as his talent in the ring. But poor Mitch Snow had not been in the AWA for too long. And I saw this happen. I don't know, Mitch was not anywhere near the locker room at the time, but Curt Hennig had gimmicked Mitch Snow's duffel bag with a padlock, two master locks, so he couldn't get it open. So when it comes time for the TV taping, Mitch can't get his duffel bag open. He's trying to get his stuff, his gear out of the bag. Well, I don't remember if he got if they called in a locksmith or if he took a hacksaw to it or whatever, but he finally got the duffel bag open, and the duffel bag was not empty when Mitch Snow had opened up the duffel bag. His gear was in there, but also there were a couple of little gifts from Curt, that you could smell on the other side of the locker room. So and this was so typical of Curt. And just kind of an FYI, I reached out to Dan Jesser, local wrestler here in the Twin Cities area, good friends with Curt. And I said, Dan, give me some Curt stories, some of the ribs. He says, I can't. He said, I talked to Brad Ringens about this, and they were so horrible. That he did is that you don't even want to share those on the air.
Was there any heat that came back to Curt, or did people know that, hey, he was doing? I mean, did anybody ever feel like he took it too far?
I'm sure they did, but you know what? It was the business. It was the business back then, and everybody did it to everybody else. You know, the ribs in wrestling, the camaraderie back then are legendary. And Curt was the kind of a guy, I mean, you know, he would deny everything, of course. If there was a rib that somebody pulled, everybody knew it was Curt. Everybody knew. But Curt was the kind of guy, he'd walk up to you, he'd tell you a story, straight-faced, and you couldn't help but believe the guy. And then you would see when he turned around, his shoulders were shaking, like he was laughing or he was winking at some guy off to the side, that he hooked another guy. That was Curt. It was the charm of Curt Hennig. And again, back in the day, ribs were ribs. And if you couldn't take it, you didn't belong in the locker room.
And I think the thing, too, about the ribs, you know, like Mick says, they were part of the business with a lot of the guys. And it was an ongoing thing. There were wrestlers that would rib each other continually back and forth, each one trying to outdo the other. And Curt just was one of those that seemed to one-up everybody and do it so well, and then deny it, you know, with a straight face. Maybe goes to confession on Saturday. I don't know, but he pulled it off.
What about, Mick? I want to kind of follow up on that. I've heard about Ray and Wahoo's ribs to Curt. Curt was, you know, he was the ribber, not the ribby. But what happened in that instance? Because I want to hear you tell that story.
One time I was there, one time I wasn't, and they were both on airplanes. And Curt had a tendency to stay up late at night. And as I said, you know, he's playing the slots or the whatever, blackjack. And, you know, we would leave early in the morning the day after the taping. And, you know, Curt, poor guy, would be staggering onto the plane half the time. It was Curt and Paul Heyman, I think, were the guys that had the worst for wear pretty much every time. But I know that the one time I was not there, Ray shaved off one of Curt's eyebrows as Curt was sleeping, which of course led to Curt showing up on TV the next week with a Band-Aid over his eye. You know, an injury in Denver.
Yeah.
It had been an injury flying over Denver. The other time, poor guy was out like a light, and I mean, he's gone and he's snoring. And 3 or 4 times, Chief Wahoo McDaniel would go to the restroom, and as he's coming back, he would smack Curt on the back of the head so hard it was like he was giving Curt one of his famous chops. And the poor guy, Curt, would just wake up like in this stupor. What just happened? And he'd go back to sleep, and Wahoo sure as shit would do it again a few minutes later. So they got Curt back, believe me. But, you know, Curt took it in stride, and, you know, if you give it, you got to take it. So, and Ray and Wahoo, what are you going to do? Argue with them? Challenge them to a fight on the tarmac? You just didn't do it.